Hey, hi, Dizzy here. Today we're talking about creating a dialogue sequence with an NPC in your own platformer level. We're gonna make it very scalable so that you can even go back to the previous options in your dialogue and choose and pick and modify however you really want this dialogue sequence to go. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. So, here we are in this empty level. It's a platformer one. And starting off, we're gonna want to place our NPC. In my case, it's gonna be this ground little monster here, thingy. You can choose whichever one you want. I'm just gonna choose for it to be no touch impossible. And now it's just gonna let me go behind them without actually getting killed, right? Alright, so now starting off with the tutorial itself, we're gonna want to go to the very last tab here, to the triggers tab, and find this block in particular. This is a toggle block, and it's a very special one because what it does is it toggles on a group, or it spawns a trigger when the player is within its range and they jump. So this is perfectly what we want, and let's just scale it here so that it's a little bit bigger. We're gonna place down a total of 3, but first we have to set it up. So we're gonna climb touch, we're gonna spawn only, and we're gonna choose to activate group ID 1. And now let's just copy and paste this so that we set up some area where our interactable is actually interactable. And this is like the very base for our operations going forward. Right now, you may notice that if you go into this this area, your jumps are not gonna actually jump. This is because, once again, this block claims touches when it activates the group. So, now that we've got this going, let's get into the second phase, which is actually performing some trickery and magicry that's gonna spawn our texts. So, starting off, let's just set up some texts. So, let's find the text block, and let's just... I'm gonna use just a little bit of a filler text here for the sake of this tutorial, but you're free to, of course, use whatever you like, whatever fits your level. First of all, let's just create this. Let's give it a group ID unique to this text. Then let's copy it. Let's just... It's whatever, really, at least on my side. And once again, let's say we're gonna have 3, just so that it's a nice number. Sure, that works. Alrighty, so now we have 3 texts with groups individually, 2, 3, and 4. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna set up a command very briefly that's just gonna disable them when the player spawns. So in order to do that, let's set a spawn trigger at the very start of the level where the player is spawned. And let's set it up to target the next group that is empty right now, so 5. And let's now have 3 alpha triggers be spawned by that group. So here we want to disable our 2, 3, and 4 groups that are our texts. And this is to happen when this trigger enables group 5, so we want to make sure to give our triggers here group 5. And then 2, 3, 4, once again, these are our groups here. So these are the ones we want to disable. Perfect. And now, whenever we enter the game, our texts are disabled. This is pretty easy stuff so far, so let's get to the more interesting things now. So now, let's initialize a counter. We're gonna use the triggers for pickup, count, and instant count. Mostly instant count and pickup. We're gonna use them to conditionally enable and disable our texts. So, in order to do that, what we're gonna start with is we're gonna set a pickup trigger in our initialization function. So, right during the spawn. And in order to have that, we have to make sure it has group 5. And let's spawn trigger multi-trigger. And now let's choose the closest empty item ID for this pickup. And let's override it to 0. So now we know that there is a count, and this count is initialized at 0. And now, just so that we already have clarity on this, I'm just gonna quickly set up an counter at item ID 1, and this is pretty much it. I'm just gonna move it up a bunch. Okay. Now if we try it out, we have a counter that says 0. All right. So going forward, we want to assign some behavior to what happens when the player jumps at any of these 3 toggle triggers, toggle blocks, right? So in order to have that, we have to make sure it activates some group. Right now it does activate group 1 already. So now that we know that, let's create this event. The way I do this usually is I document my, so let's say we want to advance dialogue, right? And then in order to do that, we have to spawn 1. Right, let's move this up just a little bit so it's definitely out of the way. And now let's set this up. So what we first want to do in here is we're gonna want to add 1 to our count. And then we're gonna, based on this count, we're gonna show or hide certain texts of ours. So let's use pickup, and let's set this pickup to be triggerable by spawnable, actually, by this toggle block, right? So by group 1, and now at item ID once again 1, because we're gonna be influencing this counter that we've initialized at 0 at first. Let's just add 1 to it, and let's make sure it's spawn trigger and it's multi-trigger. And now what you'll see when you go into the game is we have a basic counter that only works when we're close to this player, to this NPC of ours, and we're clicking. So that's a good start. And now we can make our buttons respond to this counter. And in order to do that, what we're gonna do is we're gonna create another event. And this is just gonna be update dialogue, let's say. And in order to do that, we're gonna spawn the first group that is empty right now, which is 6. So let's say this. In order to do that, we have to spawn 6. And now let's go for it. So we have to now spawn 6 when we advance dialogue. So advanced dialogue is at group 1. And this spawns 6, so update dialogue. This differentiation is here just because you might want to update dialogue sometimes when it's not actually advancing a dialogue. This is just so that you have some more flexibility going forward. So now advanced dialogue essentially gives us like +1 to this count, and then it updates the dialogue, right? Perfect. So now let's set up update dialogue. So what we really want to do is we want to enable or disable our texts here based on our count, right? So in order to have that happening, we're gonna use instant count. And we're gonna use it in a very particular manner. So once again, spawn trigger, multi-trigger. This is gonna be set to 6 because it's triggered by the update dialog event. That, for example, we're calling down here once again. And now what we want to create is whenever the count is 1, this counter is set to 1, then show the first text of ours, right? So at group 2. So then let's do that. So at item ID is once again our counter. Then target count is what we want to see is 1. And then target ID, so our text, right, is group 2. Let's activate the group. And this is it on a very basic level. Now, let's make sure that our counter also disables this group if our counter is not 1 right now. So if it's smaller than 1, then disable the group. And likewise, if it's bigger than 1, then also disable the group. So this gives us something. And now, just because I'm using toggle here, I'm gonna switch these 3 to toggle. But if you would like your text to be smoothly swooshing in and then swooshing out perhaps, then you might want to consider staying with alpha. I'm just gonna create this with a toggle right now. And this is once again something that just happens on this start event of ours. So when group 5 is triggered. Yes, and now this 2, 3, and 4. Perfect. Right. So now once again, we just have these texts disabled. And as you can see, whenever our counter hits 1, our 3 exclamation marks, which are the first text, appear. And now if we click once again, so our counter went up once again, our 3 exclamation marks have gone out of the way. And so what we can just do in order to have all of our 3 texts do that perfectly is we can simply edit this procedure after copying it to work for our other texts. So first we're doing the same thing where we check if it's 2 or if it's larger or smaller than 2 for the other text of ours. And then lastly, for the third one, exactly the same thing. So if it's 3, then enable 4. If it's larger, then disable 4, and so on and so forth. And now what we're gonna notice is we have this text appearing when we click when we're close to a monster. And right now this has bugged a little bit just because of script execution order. if you want to prevent that from happening, then what you really want to do is you want to spawn this. So like updating dialog, you want to make sure that updating dialog happens after the pickup trigger has incremented our value. So in order to do that, you're gonna just want to set up a very simple time trigger that will just delay the other action by the littlest amount possible. And you can actually even delete the spawn trigger because time already does that. So anyway, we're gonna enable stop time. We're just gonna set it to 001. Item ID is gonna be a new timeline, let's say at item ID 2. It's spawn trigger once again, because this is to do exactly the same thing as our spawn trigger did. And now it's targeting group 6. This is the group it's spawning, right? And now we don't need the spawn trigger anymore, because this time is just gonna do the same thing as the spawn trigger did, but 0.01 second later, right? Which is perfectly what we want, because we just want to make sure that this pickup trigger has time to go first, and then we want to update dialog, right? Perfect. So now we get this perfect flow. And you can hide your counter, of course. And now if you click once again, you know, you just don't get any text, which is probably what you want most of the time. And what this allows you to do, really, is if you wanted to, you could, for example, have a different dialog box here with a different NPC. And this dialog box could be having a different event here set up. So it could be spawning, for example, event at ID 7. And this event could, for example, be not advancing a dialogue, but it could be, for example, setting it up to like a static value. So for example, set dialogue 1, right? And now spawn 7, because this is what we have wanted to do, right? And what we could do here instead is make sure first that this is set to the ID that we are spawning then. And now we just want to override with count 1, right? Or with count 2. Let's make it just a little bit more original. And then the time trigger is the exact same thing. So it just, once again, ties it back to our update dialog sequence of instant counts, right? And then everything here is set up properly. And now we can first off talk with this NPC, right? Which just increments, so just goes into the next dialogue. And we could also talk with this one, who is just gonna set the dialogue to 2, right? So this gives you a lot of different options on how you want to approach your dialogue sequence. You could even have like additional conditions in this very place, in this advanced dialogue function. Like for example, you could have the pickup option add a count only if it's, for example, less than 3, and if it's more than 3, you could just ignore everything else. So maybe actually I'm gonna show you that as well. So let's just do that right now. We've gotten this far, let's end this well. So now we want to make sure that we are only adding to our count if it's no bigger than 2. So what we were gonna want to do is, if our count is 3, we don't want to add anymore, so that our better turn back text always stays on. And this is not something you're actually gonna want to do always, but it's something some people may want to do, so I'm gonna show off how to do it with using this system. Now, right now, as you can see, like, it's going upwards how many times we're clicking, right? We're just gonna make it stop whenever it hits 3. So in order to do that, we're gonna just add a filter at this point. So let's do that. Right now, this is perfectly what we're spawning, and so this is not gonna be the case anymore. We're gonna make room for one more trigger here. And this trigger is gonna be, think about it for yourself for a little bit. If you don't know, that's fine. It's gonna be instant count once again. So we're gonna be checking if our value is big enough or small enough. It's actually whether it's small enough for us to progress with our logic here. So let's instant count here. And this instant count is gonna be checking our main counter, right? So item ID 1. And now this instant count is gonna be actually the only thing that will stay on group 1 right now. And these things are not gonna be on group 1 anymore. They are not gonna be spawnable by group 1 anymore. They're gonna be spawnable by a next free group. So in this case 8. And now let's give them this group. And now it's this instant count that's gonna be spawning 8, right? So then our event just got a subgroup of sorts. And now this is what's spawning when advanced dialogue is called, right? This instant count is going to be appearing. And now all we're really doing here is we're checking if target count is smaller than 3. Now we just want to make sure once again to spawn trigger and multi-trigger. And if target count is smaller than 3, then spawn target ID 8, which is our usual logic, these two. And now what you're going to notice is we're getting 2, 3, and then stopping. And this is not the case, actually. So I have done something wrong here, then. What could it be? Right, we did not activate group. And that's pretty much it, because right now we're gonna get to 1, to 3, to 2, and then to 3. And right now it's not gonna let us go. If you hear my space, I am clicking. So we can go back to 2 with our other interaction, and then click to 3 once again, but it's not gonna let us go over 3 ever. So that pretty much sums up this tutorial. Let me know your thoughts, if you'd like something added to it. I believe I've covered this pretty exhaustively, but of course I'm open to suggestions and comments here. And see you again soon.